The police report filed on November 14th simply stated there was a disturbance at the Onyx Room. But the witnesses knew better. They saw the moment the underworld froze. It wasn't a gun that stopped the room cold. It was a pair of trembling hands moving in perfect silence. Dominic, the butcher. Moretti, the man who owned half the Chicago skyline and buried the other half, stood paralyzed. Why? Because a terrifyingly shy waitress, a nobody named Sophie, had just done the one thing his millions couldn't buy. She spoke to the one person he loved when no one else could. But Sophie had a secret too, and when her hands started moving, she didn't just order dinner. She accidentally signed a death warrant. Buckle up. This isn't a fairy tale. This is how a silent conversation started a war. The Onyx Room wasn't just a restaurant. It was a fortress disguised as a dining experience. Located on the upper tier of Chicago's Gold Coast, it was where the city's elite went to pretend they weren't sinners. The chandeliers cost more than most houses, the velvet drapes were thick enough to muffle a scream, and the staff were trained to be as invisible as oxygen. Sophie Bennett was the best at being invisible. At 23, Sophie was a phantom in a black waistcoat. She had mastered the art of the soft step walking in a way that didn't disturb the floorboards, didn't rattle the silverware, and didn't draw the eye. She was the one you handed your coat to and forgot 5 seconds later. She was the one who refilled your wine glass before you even realized it was empty. Tonight, however, the air in the kitchen felt heavy, like the pressure drop before a tornado. "He's coming," the manager, Mr. Holloway, hissed, wiping a bead of sweat from his bald head. He was a man usually composed of ice and starch, but tonight he looked like he was about to vomit. "Table 1, the private alcove. I want the tablecloths ironed twice. I want the silverware polished until it blinds you. Do you hear me?" The kitchen staff moved in a frenzy. Chefs were screaming, sous chefs were trembling. Sophie stood by the espresso machine, polishing a spoon, her heart doing a slow, terrified thud against her ribs. "Who is it?" whispered Chloe, a new hostess with too much eyeliner and not enough survival instinct. "Moretti," a line cook muttered without looking up from his onions. "Dominic Moretti." The name dropped like a lead weight. Dominic Moretti. The papers called him a logistics consultant. The streets called him the new king of Chicago. He had taken over the family business 3 years ago, after his father was gunned down on Wacker Drive. Since then, the crime rate in his territories had ironically dropped, mostly because unauthorized criminals simply vanished. He was 32, ruthlessly handsome, and had a reputation for silence. If Moretti was talking, you were safe. If he went quiet, you were already dead. "He's bringing a guest," Holloway snapped, snapping his fingers at Sophie. "Bennett, you're on water and bread for the main floor. Stay away from table 1. I'm putting Pierre on it. Pierre has experience with difficult clientele." Sophie nodded, her eyes lowered. "Yes, sir." She didn't want to be anywhere near table 1. She just wanted to finish her shift, collect her tips, and go home to her empty apartment in Rogers Park. She had rent to pay, and the medical bills for her grandmother were piling up on the kitchen counter like snowdrifts. She couldn't afford trouble. But trouble has a way of finding the quiet ones. By 8 p.m. the restaurant was humming. The lighting was dimmed to a romantic amber glow. Sophie moved through the tables, pouring sparkling water, dodging groping hands from drunk stockbrokers, and keeping her head down. Then the front doors opened. It wasn't a normal entrance. The ambient noise of the restaurant didn't just fade. It was severed. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Dominic Moretti walked in. He was taller than he looked in the blurry paparazzi photos. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like armor, tailored to hide the holster that everyone knew was there. His hair was dark, swept back, exposing a face that was sharp, angular, and completely devoid of emotion. His eyes swept the room once, a predator checking the wind before he turned slightly. He wasn't alone, and he wasn't with a supermodel or a bodyguard or a lieutenant. He was offering his arm to an elderly woman. She was tiny, dressed in a conservative black dress with a lace collar that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. Her hair was pure silver, pulled back into a severe bun. She gripped Dominic's arm with a ferocity that turned her knuckles white. She looked terrified. This was Isabella Moretti. The ghost. Rumors about Dominic's mother were rare. Some said she was crazy. Others said she was sick. Most people didn't even know she was alive. She had vanished from public life decades ago. Dominic led her through the silent room. 4 bodyguards flanked them, their eyes scanning every corner, every hand that moved too fast. They reached table 1, the secluded alcove shielded by heavy velvet curtains. Sophie was 3 tables away, pouring water for a couple, arguing about a prenup. She felt the chill radiating from the group. She saw Pierre, the head waiter, sweating as he approached the table. Pierre was arrogant French and usually unflappable. Now he looked like a man walking to the gallows. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti," Pierre said, his voice cracking slightly. "Madame, welcome to the Onyx Room." Dominic didn't look at him. He was focused entirely on his mother. He pulled out her chair, settling her in with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man with his reputation. He adjusted her shawl. He moved the candle slightly away from her hand. "Ma," Dominic said, his voice low, raspy. He leaned in close. "You okay?" The old woman didn't react. She stared straight ahead at the white tablecloth, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She looked disoriented, overwhelmed by the shadows and the flickering candlelight. "She's fine," Dominic said to the air, though his jaw tightened. He looked at Pierre. "We need a minute. Bring water. No ice. Room temperature." "Immediately, monsieur." Sophie watched from the corner of her eye. She saw the tension in Dominic's shoulders. It wasn't the tension of a mob boss fearing an assassination. It was the tension of a son who was failing. She recognized that look. She had seen it in the mirror 1,000 times. 20 minutes passed. The tension in the restaurant had morphed into a nervous hum, but every eye kept darting back to table 1. Things were going wrong. Pierre had returned to the table 3 times. Each time he retreated, looking more flushed and desperate. Mr. Holloway was pacing near the kitchen doors, wringing his hands. Sophie finished clearing a table near the service station and tried to make herself small, but the raised voices from the alcove drifted over. "I said ask her what hall she wants." Dominic's voice was rising. It wasn't a shout yet, but it had the rumble of an oncoming train. "I have tried, Monsieur Moretti," Pierre stammered. "I presented the specials. I suggested the Bronzino. She does not respond to me." "She's not stupid," Dominic snapped. "She's just—" He cut himself off, running a hand over his face. "Just bring the menu again. The one with the pictures. Do you have one with pictures? This is a Michelin star establishment, monsieur." Pierre said, his pride momentarily overriding his survival instinct. "We do not have picture menus." Dominic stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound was like a gunshot. "Then tell me what she wants to eat," Dominic growled. "She hasn't eaten in 2 days. She's scared. She's confused. And you're standing there, rattling off French words she doesn't understand. I am speaking English, sir. She can't hear you, Dominic roared. The restaurant went dead silent again. Dominic froze, realizing he had shouted. He looked down at his mother. Isabella hadn't flinched at the shout. She was still staring at the tablecloth, picking at a loose thread, trapped in her own world of silence. She's deaf, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She went deaf 3 years ago. The hearing aids irritate her, she won't wear them. She reads lips, but the lights are too low in here. She can't see your mouth. Pierre looked helpless. I can bring a notepad. She has arthritis. Dominic spat. She can't write holding a pen for long. Look at her hands. Isabella's hands were gnarled, fingers twisted. She looked up at Dominic, confusion in her eyes. She made a small, frustrated sound, a guttural noise that deaf people sometimes make when they try to vocalize without auditory feedback. Some diners nearby shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a red dress giggled nervously. Dominic's head snapped toward the giggle. His eyes were murderous. Is something funny? He asked. The woman in red went pale. No, I just... Get out, Dominic said. Excuse me. Get out. The woman and her partner scrambled up, leaving their half-eaten steaks, and practically ran for the door. Dominic turned back to Pierre. I want someone who can communicate with her. Now, find me someone who knows sign language. ASL. You have 50 staff members. One of them must know it. Holloway, the manager, rushed forward. Mr. Moretti, I apologize deeply. I don't believe we have anyone on staff with that particular skill set. I can interpret myself if we write it down on a tablet. She hates screens. Dominic said, his patience disintegrating. She thinks they're spying on her. I brought her here because she used to love this place 20 years ago. I wanted one nice dinner. Just one. He looked at his mother. Isabella looked like she was about to cry. She tapped the table looking for water, but the glass was out of her reach. Forget it, Dominic said, sounding defeated. We're leaving. He reached for his mother's chair. This was it. The disaster Holloway feared. If Moretti left angry, the reputation of the Onyx Room would be poisoned by morning. Suppliers would stop delivering. Inspectors would find violations. The place would be dead in a month. Holloway looked around wildly at his staff. Does anyone know sign language? Anyone? $5,000 bonus right now. The staff looked at their feet. The chefs shook their heads. Pierre looked at the ceiling. Sophie stood by the water station. Her heart was hammering so hard, she thought it might bruise her ribs. She knew. Her younger brother Toby had been born deaf. She had spent 10 years being his voice, his ears, his bridge to the world, until he passed away from meningitis 2 years ago. Her hands remembered the shapes. Her heart remembered the silence. But to step forward, to approach Dominic Moretti. A man who just kicked a couple out for giggling. A man whose name was whispered in fear. Don't do it. Sophie. Her brain screamed. Stay invisible. She looked at Dominic. He was struggling to help his mother stand up. Isabella was resisting, looking confused and hurt, clearly thinking she had done something wrong to make them leave so soon. She looked so small. Sophie saw her own grandmother in that face. She saw Toby in that frustration. Before her brain could stop her feet, Sophie took a step. Then another. Mr. Holloway, she said. Her voice was barely a squeak. Holloway spun around. Bennett. What? Not now. Sophie cleared her throat. She gripped her serving tray like a shield. "I can help." Dominic stopped. He turned slowly to face her. Sophie felt the weight of his gaze. It was heavy, physical. He scanned her from her scuffed shoes to her messy bun. He looked skeptical, almost insulted that this tiny, shaking waitress was speaking up. "You?" Dominic asked. "You know ASL?" "Yes, sir," Sophie whispered. "Fluent." Dominic stared at her for a long, agonizing second. Then he gestured to the table. "You have 2 minutes," he said. "If you're wasting my time, you'll never work in this city again." Sophie nodded. She set her tray down on a side table. She took a deep breath, smoothing her apron. She walked past a stunned Pierre, past a terrified Holloway, and stepped into the candlelight of table 1. She didn't look at Dominic. She knelt down beside Isabella's chair. Kneeling was a breach of protocol. Waiters stood. But Sophie knew that to be heard, she had to be seen. She needed to be at eye level. Isabella flinched when Sophie appeared next to her. The old woman's eyes darted to Dominic in panic. Sophie smiled. It wasn't the fake customer service smile. It was a soft, genuine smile. She raised her hands. "Hello," Sophie signed. Her movements were fluid, practiced, graceful. "My name is Sophie. You look beautiful tonight." Isabella froze. Her eyes widened. The fear in her face cracked, replaced by shock. Dominic watched like a hawk, his hand hovering near his jacket. Isabella slowly raised her own gnarled hands. Her movements were stiff from arthritis, jerky and slow. "You speak hands," Isabella signed back. "Yes," Sophie signed. "I am your waitress. The food here is good. But the chef is grumpy." Isabella blinked. Then a tiny miracle of a smile touched her lips. She let out a short, rusty laugh. "My son is grumpy too," Isabella signed, gesturing to Dominic. Sophie glanced up at Dominic. He was staring at her, his mouth slightly open. He looked from his mother's smiling face to Sophie's hands. "He loves you very much," Sophie signed to Isabella. "He wants you to have a good dinner. What do you feel like eating? Something soft? Something spicy?" Isabella's shoulders dropped 3 inches. The tension left her body. She leaned in toward Sophie. "I want the scallops. And wine. Red wine. Don't tell him. He thinks I should drink water." Sophie laughed softly. She turned to Dominic. "She wants the scallops, sir, and a glass of Pinot Noir. She says specifically that she doesn't want you to know about the wine." Dominic looked at his mother. Isabella gave him a defiant look, clutching her napkin. For the first time all night, the darkness in Dominic's eyes lifted. He looked at Sophie. Really looked at her. "She wants wine?" he asked, his voice softer. "Yes, sir." "Give her the bottle," Dominic said. Sophie turned back to Isabella and signed. "He says okay. You are the boss." Isabella beamed. She reached out and patted Sophie's cheek. Dominic sat down slowly. The bodyguards relaxed. Holloway slumped against the wall in relief. "What's your name again?" Dominic asked. His eyes locked on Sophie's face. "Sophie, sir. Sophie Bennett." "Sophie." He repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "You're not going anywhere, Sophie. You're serving us tonight. Only you. Tell Pierre to go away." "Yes, sir." Sophie stood up, her legs trembling. She had done it. She had survived. But as she turned to head to the kitchen, She caught Dominic watching her. He wasn't looking at her like a waitress anymore. He was looking at her like a puzzle he intended to solve. And then she saw it. A man at the bar sitting 3 stools down watching the reflection in the mirror. He wasn't looking at Dominic. He was looking at her. And when he saw her catch his eye, he tapped his nose twice. Sophie's blood ran cold. That was the signal. Sophie retreated to the kitchen, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The heavy swinging doors cut off the hum of the dining room, plunging her back into the chaos of clattering pans and shouting chefs. But the noise felt distant, muffled by the blood rushing in her ears. Bennett Holloway appeared, his face flushed with triumph. "You're a lifesaver," I saw them laughing. Laughing. The Moretti table is laughing. "Do you know what this means?" Sophie gripped the stainless steel counter, her knuckles white. "I need a minute, Mr. Holloway." "Take 5. Take 10. Have a tart." Holloway was practically vibrating. "Just get back out there and keep the Queen Mother happy. If this goes well, there's a promotion in it for you." Sophie nodded numbly and slipped into the dry storage pantry, closing the door behind her. In the dim light, surrounded by sacks of flour and cans of tomatoes, she finally let the terror take over. She slid down the wall, hugging her knees, the man at the bar. She knew him. Not personally, but she knew the type. He was Mick the Rat O'Shea. He was a bottom feeder, a collector for the O'Banion crew, the Irish mob that controlled the South Side docks. They were the reason her father had fled the state 5 years ago, leaving Sophie and her sick grandmother with a debt that never seemed to shrink no matter how many double shifts she worked. The nose tap wasn't a flirtation. It was a reminder. "We see you. We know where you work. We know where you live." And now the O'Banions saw her cozying up to Dominic Moretti, the sworn enemy of every other syndicate in Chicago. To Mick, this didn't look like waitressing. It looked like Sophie had picked a side. Breath she signed to herself in the dark. Just breathe. She couldn't run. If she ran, they'd go to her grandmother's nursing home. She had to finish the shift. She had to pretend everything was normal. Sophie splashed cold water on her face at the prep sink, straightened her apron, and walked back out onto the floor. When she approached table 1, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The terrifying silence was gone. Isabella was halfway through her scallops, her face animated as she signed something rapidly to Dominic. Dominic was leaning forward, watching his mother's hands with an intensity that broke Sophie's heart. He was trying so hard to understand, but he was missing half of it. Sophie stepped into the light. Dominic looked up, and for a split second, his guard dropped. He looked relieved to see her. "She's telling a story," Dominic said, his voice low. "About a bird, a blue bird." Sophie watched Isabella's hands, and the blue jay stole the ribbon right off the porch. "Your father laughed so hard he spilled his coffee." It was a blue jay. Sophie translated softly, pouring more wine for Isabella. "It stole a ribbon from her porch. Your father laughed and spilled his coffee." Dominic's eyes widened. A faint smile ghosted across his lips, a real one this time. "I remember that. I was 6. It was my birthday ribbon." He looked at his mother and nodded. "Signing a clumsy." "I remember." Isabella clapped her hands silently, her eyes crinkling. She turned to Sophie. "He was a messy boy," Isabella signed. "Always dirt on his knees. Now he wears expensive suits and looks like a funeral director." Sophie stifled a giggle. "She says, 'You were a messy boy.'" She thinks you dress like a funeral director now. Dominic chuckled. It was a deep, rusty sound like an engine turning over after years of disuse. The sound turned heads across the restaurant. The staff froze. Dominic Moretti was laughing. Tell her these suits cost more than this building. Dominic said, his eyes locking with Sophie's. There was a charge in the air between them. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the intimacy of translation. Sophie was the bridge between his heart and his mother's mind. For a man who controlled everything but couldn't control this one silence, Sophie was the most powerful person in the room. So, Sophie, Dominic said, leaning back and swirling his wine. Where did you learn? You said you're fluent. My brother, Sophie said quietly. Toby. He was born deaf. Was Dominic caught the past tense immediately. He passed away 2 years ago. Dominic's expression darkened with sympathy. I'm sorry. Truly. He would have liked you, Sophie lied. Toby would have been terrified of Dominic. He liked men who protected their mothers. Dominic stared at her. The air felt thin, electric. And you? Dominic asked. Who protects you, Sophie? The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Sophie felt a chill crawl up her spine. She glanced toward the door of the bar. The stool where Mick had been sitting was empty. But there was something on the bar counter. A cocktail napkin weighed down by a cherry stem. I can take care of myself, sir. Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. I doubt that. Dominic murmured. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It was black with nothing but a gold phone number embossed on it. If anyone gives you trouble management customers, anyone you call this. Direct line. 24 hours. He slid the card across the white tablecloth. Sophie stared at it. Taking that card was dangerous. It was a contract. But refusing it might insult him. Isabella reached out and tapped Sophie's hand. Take it. He is a bear. But he is a good bear. Sophie took the card and slipped it into her apron pocket. Thank you, Mr. Moretti. Dominic, he corrected. Mr. Moretti was my father, and he definitely spilled that coffee. The dinner wound down. Isabella refused dessert but asked for tea. By the time they were ready to leave, the restaurant was closing. Dominic stood up and helped his mother into her heavy wool coat. He turned to Sophie. Walk us to the door, he asked. It wasn't a request. Sophie walked them to the valet stand. The wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, cutting through her thin uniform. The bodyguards fell into formation. A sleek black SUV rolled up. Before getting in, Isabella hugged Sophie. It was a fierce, bony hug. Thank you, little bird, she signed. Dominic stood by the open door. The streetlights cast sharp shadows across his face. He looked at Sophie, shivering in the cold. You have a coat? He asked. Inside, I have to finish my side work. Right? He hesitated, looking like he wanted to say something else. The tip is included. But this... He pressed a folded wad of cash into her hand. This is for the conversation. You gave me my mother back for a night. I don't forget favors, Sophie. It was my pleasure, Dominic. He held her gaze for 1 second too long, then nodded and got into the car. The heavy door slammed shut. The SUV peeled away, disappearing into the Chicago night. Sophie stood there for a moment, clutching the money. She felt warm, despite the cold. Then she remembered the napkin. She ran back inside, past the buses, clearing the tables, and went toward to the bar. The napkin was still there. She picked it up. Written in jagged red ink, probably from a cocktail stirrer, were 3 words. The alley. Now. Sophie's stomach dropped through the floor. She looked at the back exit. The alleyway was the only way to the staff lockers and the bus stop. She looked at the front door. Locked. The manager had already engaged the security gate. The only way out was the back. She was trapped. The alley behind the Onyx room was a narrow canyon of brick and steam. Dumpsters lined one wall, overflowing with the night's waste. The only light came from a single flickering bulb above the steel security door. Sophie stepped out. Her coat pulled tight around her throat. The cold air smelled of garbage and snow. She clutched her purse strap with both hands, her knuckles aching. "Hello," she whispered. Nothing. Just the distant wail of a siren and the drip of condensation from an AC unit. She started walking fast, head down, aiming for the street lamp at the end of the alley. Her footsteps echoed on the wet pavement. Click-clack. Click-clack. Then a shadow detached itself from the wall. In a rush, Sophie gasped and spun around. Mick O'Shea stepped into the dim light. He was a wiry man with a face like a hatchet and eyes that looked like broken glass. He was wearing a cheap leather jacket and chewing on a toothpick. Behind him, 2 other men emerged from behind the dumpsters. They were bigger, slower, wearing hooded sweatshirts. "Mick," Sophie breathed. "I don't have the money. Not until the 1st of the month. You know the schedule." Mick laughed. It was a dry, scratching sound. He walked closer, crowding her space. She could smell stale cigarettes and peppermint schnapps. "This ain't about the money, sweetheart. Although that interest is piling up, Grandma's nursing home ain't cheap, is it?" "Leave her out of this," Sophie said, her voice shaking. "I'm just a concerned citizen," Mick sneered. He reached out and fingered the lapel of her coat. "We saw you tonight, you and the butcher. Very cozy, lots of hand-waving, lots of smiles." "I was just doing my job," Sophie stammered, backing up until she hit the cold brick wall. "His mother is deaf. I was translating. That's all." Mick slammed his hand against the wall next to her head. Sophie flinched, a small cry escaping her lips. "Don't lie to me," Mick hissed. "You were whispering in his ear. You were laughing. Moretti doesn't laugh." "What did you tell him? Did you tell him about us, about your daddy's debt?" "No, I swear, we just talked about food." "Bull." Mick spat. He leaned in close, his nose almost touching hers. "Here's how it is, Sophie. You're in a unique position. You're gonna be our ears now. Since you're so good with hands, you're gonna use them to help us." "What? What do you mean?" "Next time he comes in, you listen. You find out where he's moving the shipment next Thursday. You find out who he's meeting." Mick grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "And if you don't? Well, old ladies have brittle bones. Accidents happen at nursing homes all the time. Falls down the stairs, slipping in the bath." Sophie felt bile rise in her throat. "Please, I can't. He'll kill me." "He might." Mick shrugged. "But I definitely will." "So you pick the butcher or the rat?" He reached into her pocket. Sophie froze. He pulled out the wad of cash Dominic had given her. "Consider this a down payment," Mick said, pocketing the money. "Now get out of here, and remember we're watching." Mick turned to walk away, his goons snickering. Sophie slid down the wall, tears hot on her cheeks. She was going to be sick. She had lost the money, she was trapped between 2 warring mobs, and her grandmother was a target. "Hey, Mick," a voice called out from the darkness. It wasn't Sophie's voice. It was deep, calm, and terrifyingly authoritative. Mick froze. He turned slowly toward the mouth of the alley. A figure stood silhouetted against the streetlights. The glowing tip of a cigar illuminated a sharp jawline. Dominic Moretti. He wasn't alone. Two of his bodyguards, mountains of men in wool coats, blocked the exit. "Mr. Moretti." Mick stammered, his bravado evaporating instantly. We were just having a chat with the girl. Old family friends." Dominic took a slow drag from his cigar and exhaled a plume of smoke. He walked forward, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. He stopped 3 feet from Mick, towering over him. "She's a waitress, Mick," Dominic said casually. "She serves pasta. She pours wine. She doesn't have friends like you." "It's a misunderstanding, Dom, Mr. Moretti. Her father owed the O'Banions. We're just collecting." "Is that right?" Dominic looked past Mick to Sophie, huddled against the wall. She was shaking violently. Dominic's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened into black diamonds as he looked back at Mick. "She served my mother tonight," Dominic said softly. "She made my mother smile. Do you know how rare that is?" "Look, take the money," Mick said, pulling the wad of cash out of his pocket and holding it out with a trembling hand. "Keep it. We're good." Dominic looked at the cash. Then he looked at Mick's hand. "You touched her," Dominic stated. "It wasn't a question. You put your hands in her pockets. Grab him." The command was barely a whisper. The 2 bodyguards moved with terrifying speed. Before Mick could scream, he was pinned against the dumpster. The other 2 goons looked at each other and bolted, running past Dominic. Dominic didn't even turn his head. He let them go. He only wanted the rat. Dominic walked up to Mick. He took the cigar from his mouth and inspected the burning tip. "This is my city," Dominic said calmly. "And the people inside this building. The staff. They're mine too. You tax them, you tax me. You threaten them, you threaten me." "I'm sorry, I didn't know," Mick squealed. "You knew." Dominic took the cash from Mick's hand. He turned and walked over to Sophie. He knelt down, ignoring the slush soaking into his expensive suit trousers. He held out the money. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Sophie shook her head, unable to speak. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "Can you stand?" She tried, but her knees buckled. Dominic caught her. His grip was firm, warm, and incredibly strong. He pulled her up, steadying her against his chest. She could smell expensive cologne tobacco and the faint scent of gunpowder. "I can't be seen with you," Sophie whispered, panic rising again. "They'll kill her." "My grandmother." Dominic looked down at her. "No, they won't." He turned back to Mick, who was still pinned by the guards. "Listen to me closely, Mick," Dominic said, his voice carrying over the wind. "The debt is cancelled. The girl is off limits. The grandmother is off limits. If I hear that a hair on their heads has been disturbed, if I hear she even tripped on a sidewalk, I will find you, and I will take your hands, so you can never touch anything that belongs to me ever again. Do you understand?" "Yes, yes, God, yes," Mick cried. "Throw him in the trash," Dominic ordered. The guards tossed Mick into the open dumpster. He landed with a wet crash and a yelp. Dominic turned his full attention back to Sophie. He took off his heavy overcoat and draped it over her shoulders. It engulfed her, warm and heavy. "My car is around the corner," Dominic said. "I'm driving you home." "I can't," Sophie protested weakly. "This makes it worse." "Sophie," Dominic said, gripping her shoulders. He forced her to look at him. "You're not invisible anymore. You tried to be, but you're not. You stepped into the light to help my mother. Now you're in my light, and nothing hurts what's in my light." He waited for her to process this. "Now," he said gently, "where does Grandma live?" We need to send some boys to watch the nursing home. Just in case. Sophie looked at him. She saw the violence he was capable of. Yes. But she also saw the man who remembered a blue jay and a ribbon. She realized with a terrifying jolt that she had just traded a debt to a street rat for a debt to the king. Rogers Park, she whispered. She's at St. Jude's. Dominic nodded. He guided her toward the end of the alley, his arm protective around her back. Let's go, he said. You're quitting this job tomorrow. What I can't. I need the money. You're not going to be a waitress anymore, Sophie, Dominic said, opening the door to his SUV. My mother needs a companion, someone who speaks her language. And I need someone I can trust. He paused, looking at her with intense, dark eyes. And right now, you're the only person in Chicago who hasn't lied to me. The Moretti estate was located in Lake Forest, a sprawling expanse of limestone and wrought iron, hidden behind a gate that looked capable of stopping a tank. To the outside world, it was a historic landmark. To the underworld, it was the fortress where Dominic Moretti plotted the future of Chicago. For Sophie, it was a gilded cage, but one filled with warmth she hadn't known existed. 2 weeks had passed since the incident in the alley. Sophie had quit the Onyx room the next morning. Her grandmother, Grandma Rose, had been moved to a private suite at St. Jude's, paid for by a shell company. Sophie knew led back to Dominic. The security detail outside Rose's room was discreet but lethal. Sophie slept in the guest wing of the Moretti mansion, a room larger than her entire apartment, with windows overlooking the frozen lake. Her job was simple. Be Isabella's voice. Be her friend. Every morning, Sophie sat with Isabella in the sunroom. They drank tea. They played chess. And they talked. Sophie's hands flew translating the news, the gossip of the household staff, and the memories Isabella had locked away in her silence. Isabella was blossoming. The confusion that had plagued her at the restaurant was fading. With communication restored, her sharp wit returned. Isabella signed one Tuesday morning, watching Dominic through the glass doors of his study. He was on the phone, pacing his tie, loosened, a scowl etched onto his face. He loves you, Sophie said aloud, then signed it. He wants you safe. Safety is boring. Isabella scoffed, her fingers moving quickly. I want grandchildren. I want noise. I want him to look at a woman the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. Sophie blushed, nearly dropping her teacup. He doesn't look at me like that. I am deaf, little bird, not blind. Sophie looked toward the study. Dominic paused his pacing. He looked up, catching her eye through the glass. The scowl vanished, replaced by a soft, almost imperceptible nod. The connection between them was a taut wire, humming with electricity. Later that evening, the reality of her new life crashed in. Dominic entered the library where Sophie was reading. He looked exhausted. There was a bruise on his knuckles and a splatter of something dark on his cuff that he had tried to scrub out. How was she today? Dominic asked, pouring himself a whiskey. He didn't offer her one. He knew she didn't drink. She's happy, Sophie said, marking her page. She beat me at chess, twice, and she wants to go to the opera gala on Saturday. Dominic froze. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The charity ball number, absolutely not. She saw the invitation on your desk, Sophie said softly. She's been talking about it all day. She says she hasn't worn her emeralds in 5 years. She wants to feel normal, Dominic. It's not safe. Dominic said, his voice hard. The Urbanians have been quiet since the alley. Too quiet. If I take her out in public, it's a security nightmare. She's your mother, not a prisoner, Sophie countered, surprising herself with her boldness. Dominic turned on her, his eyes flashing. Do you know what happens if I slip up? Do you know what people like Mick O'Shea do to leverage a man like me? They don't come for me. They come for what I love. He stopped. The silence in the room was deafening. What I love. He hadn't meant to say it. The implication hung in the air. He was talking about his mother, of course, but the way he looked at Sophie, intense, hungry and terrified, suggested the list of things he loved had grown by one. Sophie stood up and walked over to him. She wasn't the shy waitress anymore. Living in this house, seeing the burden he carried had made her brave. She needs this, Sophie whispered. And maybe you do too. You can't keep everyone in a glass box forever. Dominic looked down at her. He reached out his rough hand, grazing her cheek. His thumb traced her lower lip. If we go, he said, his voice rasping. You have to be there, right next to her. You don't leave her side, not for a second. You are her ears. You are her guard. I won't leave her, Sophie promised. And Sophie? Dominic leaned in his forehead, resting against hers. If anything happens, if you see anything, you tell me. You don't try to be a hero. You run to me. I promise. He kissed her then. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, a kiss that tasted of whiskey and fear, and a longing so deep it felt like drowning. When he pulled away, he looked like a man who had just sealed his fate. Get a dress, he said roughly, turning away to hide his face. Something expensive. We're going to the opera. The Chicago Lyric Opera House was a cavern of gold leaf and red velvet, buzzing with the city's elite. Senators rubbed shoulders with tech billionaires, and crime lords in tuxedos clinked glasses with judges. It was the one night of the year where the lines of legality blurred under the guise of charity. Sophie wore a gown of midnight blue silk, long-sleeved and backless, chosen by Isabella. She felt beautiful, but she also felt exposed. She stood constantly at Isabella's elbow, her eyes scanning the room, her hands ready to translate. Dominic was a statue in a tuxedo. He moved through the crowd with lethal grace, shaking hands, smiling tightly, but his eyes never stopped moving. His top lieutenants were scattered around the perimeter, earpieces hidden. Isabella was radiant. She held court, smiling as people approached, waiting for Sophie to translate their compliments into sign language. They are all snakes, Isabella signed, discreetly, a smile plastered on her face. That man in the grey suit. He owes Dominic $2 million. Sophie stifled a laugh. He says you look lovely, Mrs. Moretti. Everything seemed fine until the intermission. The crowd moved toward the grand staircase for champagne. The noise level rose, a cacophony of laughter, clinking glass and orchestral tuning. Sophie felt a prickle on the back of her neck. She scanned the mezzanine level. A group of waiters was moving through the crowd with trays. One of them, a tall man with a scar above his lip, wasn't looking at his tray. He was looking at Dominic. Sophie watched him. She knew the rhythm of service. She knew how a waiter moved. This man moved like a soldier. He raised a hand to scratch his ear. Then he tapped his nose. Sophie's blood froze. The signal. The same one Mick had used at the Onyx room. She looked across the balcony. Another waiter standing near the private box entrance tapped his nose in response. It wasn't just a signal. It was a countdown. Sophie looked at Dominic. He was 10 feet away, trapped in a conversation with the mayor. The noise of the crowd was overwhelming. If she shouted, he might not hear her, or worse, the shooters would panic and fire blindly into the crowd. Isabella was right next to her. She had to warn him, but she couldn't make a sound. Sophie stepped into Dominic's line of sight. She didn't wave. She didn't scream. She simply raised her hands to her throat, her face composed, but her eyes locking onto his. Dominic saw her. He stopped mid-sentence. Trap Sophie signed. Her movements were sharp, military, precise. 3 men. Waiters, north balcony, west exit, guns. Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't look up at the balcony. He didn't break his composure. He smiled at the mayor. "Mr. Mayor, if you'll excuse me," Dominic said smoothly. "I believe my mother needs some air." He turned. His hand went to the small of his back. He tapped his earpiece twice, a specific rhythm. "Code black," he whispered. "Mezzanine. The staff." Then all hell broke loose. The fake waiter on the balcony realized he had been made. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a silenced pistol. "Down!" Dominic roared, tackling the mayor and shoving Isabella towards Sophie. Sophie grabbed Isabella, pulling her behind a marble pillar. Just as the marble shattered, sprayed by bullets, screams erupted. The ballroom dissolved into chaos. People trampled each other in a rush for the doors. Dominic was returning fire, his movements precise. His bodyguards surged forward, creating a wall of flesh and Kevlar around the pillar. "Get them out!" Dominic screamed to his head of security, Luca. "Take the service elevator." "Dominic!" Sophie screamed, clutching Isabella. "Go!" Dominic looked at her, his eyes wild. "I'm right behind you, go." Luca grabbed Sophie and Isabella, rushing them through a side door into the kitchen corridors. The sound of gunfire echoed behind them, deafening and terrifying. They sprinted down the hallway. Isabella was gasping for air, clutching her chest. But she was running.
They reached the service elevator. Luca slammed the button. The doors groaned open. "Get in!" Luca barked. Sophie pushed Isabella in, but as she turned to follow, a heavy metal fire door slammed down between the hallway and the elevator bay, triggered by the alarm system. Luca and Isabella were inside the elevator. Sophie was on the other side. "Sophie!" Isabella screamed, her voice distorted, banging on the closing elevator doors. "Go!" Sophie yelled. "Take her down!" The elevator doors slid shut. Sophie was alone in the hallway. She heard footsteps, heavy boots running on tile. She turned. At the end of the corridor, the fake waiter with the scar appeared. He was bleeding from a shoulder wound, his face twisted in a tungsug. He saw Sophie. "You," he spat. "The little hand talker." He raised his gun. Sophie scrambled back, slipping on the polished floor. She had nowhere to go. The fire door was locked. She closed her eyes, waiting for the flash. Bang! The shot was deafening, but Sophie didn't feel pain. She opened her eyes. The assassin was on the floor, a hole in the center of his forehead. Standing behind him, smoke curling from the barrel of a silver Desert Eagle, was Dominic. He was disheveled, his tie gone, his shirt stained with blood that wasn't his. He stepped over the body, his eyes fixed on Sophie. He didn't speak. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and hauled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. He was shaking. The King of Chicago was shaking. "I told you." He buried his face in her neck, breathing in her scent. "I told you to stay with her." "The door," Sophie sobbed, clinging to his ruined shirt. "The fire door came down. I couldn't. It's okay, Dominic whispered, kissing her hair, her forehead, her tears. You saved us. You saved everyone. I saw your hands. I saw them. He pulled back, cupping her face. You spoke to me in the middle of the noise. No one else could have done that. Is she safe? Sophie asked. Luca radioed. She's in the car. She's fine. Dominic's thumb stroked her cheek. But we have to go. The O'Banions. This was a suicide run. They're desperate. He took her hand. Can you run? Yes. Then run with me. And don't let go. The war that followed lasted 3 days. It was swift, brutal, and fought in the shadows. With the failed assassination attempt at the opera, the O'Banion family had overplayed their hand. They had endangered civilians, politicians, and the unspoken truce of the city. Dominic didn't even have to do all the work. The other families, disgusted by the recklessness and fearing the heat the opera shooting would bring, turned on the O'Banions. Mick O'Shea was found in a trunk at O'Hare Airport. The O'Banion leadership fled to Ireland, never to return. By the 4th day, silence returned to Chicago. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of peace. Sophie sat on the terrace of the Lake Forest estate, wrapped in a cashmere blanket. The winter sun was bright, reflecting off the snow. She was watching Isabella teach Dominic sign language. They were sitting on the bench near the garden. Isabella was laughing, correcting Dominic's stiff fingers. No, like this, Isabella signed. Thumb out. You are saying donkey instead of stubborn. Dominic frowned, adjusting his hand. Like this better, Isabella signed. But you are still a donkey. Sophie smiled, bringing the tray of espresso over to them. Dominic looked up. The bruises on his face were fading. He reached out and took the tray from her, setting it down on the stone table. Then he took her hand. Sit, he said. Sophie sat. Isabella watched them, her eyes twinkling. She took her espresso and discreetly turned her chair toward the lake, giving them privacy. The police report came out today, Dominic said quietly. They're calling it a gang-related disturbance. No names mentioned. You're clear, Sophie. You can go back to your apartment. You can go back to your life. Your grandmother's bills are paid in full for the next 10 years. You're free. Sophie felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. Are you firing me? Dominic looked at the lake. I'm giving you an out. This life. You saw what happened at the opera. It's dangerous. It's ugly. You don't belong in the dark, Sophie. You're too good. He let go of her hand. It felt like a physical blow. I can have a car take you back to Rogers Park within the hour. Sophie looked at him. She saw the pain in his eyes. He was trying to protect her, the only way he knew how, by pushing her away. He was terrified that next time the bullet wouldn't miss. She looked at Isabella, who was watching a cardinal in the snow. She looked at the house, the fortress that had become a home. Sophie stood up. Dominic flinched, expecting her to walk away. Instead, she moved to stand directly in front of him. She waited until he looked up. She raised her hands. I was invisible for 23 years, she signed slowly. I was a ghost in a restaurant. I was a ghost in my own life. Dominic watched her hands mesmerized. He understood every word. He had been practicing. You saw me, she continued. You gave me a voice. If I go back to that apartment, I will be invisible again. I don't want to be safe, Dominic. I want to be heard. She lowered her hands and spoke, her voice steady and strong. I'm not going anywhere, unless you don't want me. Dominic stood up slowly.
He looked at this woman, this small, shy waitress who had walked into a lion's den and tamed the beasts with nothing but silence. "I want you," he said, his voice cracking. "I want you more than I want my next breath. Then stop trying to send me away." Dominic pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He looked at it, then at her. "I was going to wait," he admitted. "Maybe 6 months, maybe a year, to do this properly. But I almost lost you in that hallway, and I don't waste time anymore." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, a vintage emerald surrounded by diamonds. It was Isabella's ring, the one she hadn't worn in years. "My mother gave this to me this morning," Dominic said. "She said if I let you leave, she would disown me." Sophie gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Sophie Bennett," Dominic said, dropping to one knee in the snow. "Will you be my voice? Will you be my heart? Will you marry me?" Sophie looked at Isabella. The old woman had turned around. She was grinning, giving Sophie 2 thumbs up. Sophie looked back at Dominic. The King of Chicago was on his knees waiting for her command. She didn't speak. She didn't sign. She simply knelt down in the snow beside him and kissed him. And in the silence of the winter garden, with the only witness being a deaf mother and a watching cardinal, the shy waitress became the queen. The disturbance at the Onyx Room had started a war. But the silence had started a life. And that is how Sophie Bennett went from pouring water to ruling an empire. It wasn't about the guns or the money or the power. It was about the one thing Dominic Moretti couldn't buy someone who truly understood him. In a world full of noise, Sophie was the only one who knew how to listen. If you loved this story of danger romance and the power of silence, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story. What would you have done in the alleyway? Would you have taken the money or called Dominic? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.